Hello, welcome to Free Bible Commentary with Pastor Teacher Dr. Bob Utley. Be sure to visit Free Bible Commentary at www.freebiblecommentary.org. Now, here's Bob.
We're continuing our study in the Psalms, and today we're going to be in Psalm 77. It's impossible to cover too many Psalms at one time, so I think 77 catches the essence of this lesson, and I want to spend our time here. I hope you'll turn in your Bibles. If I had to title this, I would title it No Quick Fixes. I think we tend to say cliches spiritually that really don't meet man's needs. And this psalm is the struggle of a man who is really in some deep water. And he tries all the traditional things he thinks will help, and he finds no help immediately. I think this is really going to have an impact on the people that we talk to who are having struggles and problems and needs, and this psalm can really speak to those areas. Now, in the introductory, this word Zeduthun is a word that speaks of a special group of Levites. It's mentioned several times. 1 Chronicles 16, 41 and 42, 1 Chronicles 25, 1 through 3, and 2 Chronicles 5, 12, so you might want to look that up. It's a psalm that was sung to the worshiping congregation, and I think that says something about the normacy of problems. They're normal. Everybody's got them. This speaks to it. My voice rises to God, and I will cry aloud. My voice rises to God, and He will hear me. Now, this guy is a man of prayer. Have you ever got by yourself and prayed out loud? There's something about that. It's helpful at times. This guy's just not talking softly, mumbling. The word here for cry, it means he's loudly, he's wailing. And there's no doubt in his mind that God's going to hear him. I mean, he's not thinking, well, it's bouncing off the roof. Is there a God up there? No, he knows there's a God up there, and he knows God is hearing. But this is not going to solve his problem. Listen to what he says. In the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord, and in night my hand was stretched out without weariness. Now, King James has, my sore ran. Oh, yuck. That's a gross image and a gross translation. You've got to remember that King James is based on the manuscripts we had in 1611. We have had much more archaeological activity since then. The word is talking about prayer. Now, a Jewish form of prayer is holding out the hands and up to God and lifting up the eyes with the eyes open. This man's been praying all night long. That's what it's talking about, okay? He sought the Lord in the day of his trouble. I prayed all night long, but my soul refused to be comforted. How many times do we say somebody we don't want to mess with them, we just say, well, go pray about it. Now, that's good advice. And it's always helpful. But it doesn't always immediately solve our hurts and problems. You see, if it is true that prayer is basically not us just pulling God's string and wanting something, but if prayer is basically and in essence a time spent with God, a relationship focus, then we need those times whether we get a specific answer to our request or not. Here's a man who prayed often, prayed regularly, prayed intensely, believed God heard him, had faith in his prayers, but they did not solve the man's deepest need. Be careful of those spiritual cliches. Now look at the second thing. When I remember God, then I am disturbed. What does that mean? Well, you know, put in a philosophical context, our world is the pit. There's evil, there's suffering, there's man's inhumanity and cruelty to other men, there's our own personal egotism and pride, there's physical evil, tornadoes, hurricanes, disease, birth defects. There's personal evil and greed and manipulation. Does God know what's going on? You say, well, He's a loving, kind, powerful God. The more I look at my world And the more I think about God being all-loving and all-powerful, the worse it gets, not the better it gets. The more I think about a loving, positive, Father-image God, and the more I know how much I'm hurting and how much evil and suffering there is around me, the more it intensifies the problem, not ease the problem. Now, philosophically speaking, either God is all-powerful and doesn't change anything, which means He's evil, or God is not all-powerful. He would change it if He could, but He can't. We don't believe either one of those. We believe that God is all-powerful, that He is loving and kind, and that the condition of our world is because of man's sin, not God. But that does not help me if I have a deformed child, or if I have cancer, or if I'm getting a divorce, or if I'm being misunderstood. The more I think about the power and goodness of God, and the more I look at my life, the worse I begin to feel. You hear what I'm saying? Now, when I remembered God, then I am disturbed. It continues. When I sigh, then my spirit grows faint. And you know, a sigh is kind of just a giving up. It's a cultural symbol of desperation. Now, it continues. Thou hast held my eyelids open. This poor guy can't sleep and he's blaming it on God. You know, it's the toothpick deal and God put him there. Well, I think that's a bit much, but anyway. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. How often I have just, and really counseling's based on this. Much of counseling is just a sympathetic ear, listening to someone. Let them tell you about their hurts and problems and frustrations. And somehow just talking about it helps. But this old boy can't even talk about it. Have you ever been hurting so bad you just can't talk about it? And the more you think about God, the more miserable you get. And the more you pray, it doesn't seem to do anything. He hadn't got anybody to talk to. Have you ever been that distressed that there just didn't seem to be anybody that would understand? You talk to God, but it just doesn't seem to do it? Boy, this man's really in deep water. Notice verse 5. Then I considered the days of old, and the years long ago. I will remember the song in the night, and I will meditate with my heart, and my soul ponders. What's this guy doing now? He's going back to the good old days. Now, you know what the good old days are. The good old days are the bad old days that your memory has forgotten the bad points to. I get tickled to death about people about the good old days. There ain't no good old days. Human memory has a wonderful ability to accentuate the positive and put down the things that are negative. Just look back in your life. Do you remember the bad things or the good things? The good old days had no more opportunities nor problems than today. But you know what we do? You know what we do? We tend to start comparing our life with how things used to be, and we're always going to come out in the wrong end of that deal. He's going back and thinking about the way things were. Look what he says. When I remember my song in the night. Now that is the good times he had with God. Those enjoyable times, those refreshing seasons. Comparison is always a problem, because you know what it does? If we allow our mind to compare, then what we're doing is focusing in on circumstances. If your joy and peace and Christian stability are related to circumstances, they are always vulnerable to be taken away. We must, as Christians, come to that point where there is an inner security of our life based on our relationship with God, not on what's swirling around our lives. This guy wants to go back and think about the good old days, but the good old days are and don't we do that? Man, one of the fastest growing radio stations as far as a format is nostalgia. We like to do that as human beings, but it's not helpful spiritually. When it says the word ponders here, and my spirit ponders, that's the Hebrew word that means make diligent search. This old guy is really rummaging through the recesses of his mind. He wants to remember those other days. Days when God seemed to be so good and so close. And he wants those days. No, the days we have right today are the best days. Think about that. God provides us what we need, and we can't go back to a different time. So look at all the things this guy tried. Tried prayer. That didn't work too well. Then he tried to remember the goodness of God. That didn't help. Then he couldn't find anybody to talk to it about. And then he tried to go back and remember the good old days. None of these things helped. They're all good, I think, to some extent, but none of them helped him. Look at verse 7 through 9. Boy, through 10, he's really getting deep. Will the Lord reject forever? And will he never be favorable again? Has his loving kindness ceased forever? Has his promise come to an end forever? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Or has he in anger withdrawn his compassion? This man is beginning to doubt not himself. He's beginning to doubt the covenant attributes of God. He's beginning to doubt the goodness of God. Now, it's one thing for me to doubt me. It's one thing for me to not trust me. It's a whole different ballgame when I start doubting God and when I quit trusting God. Now, what he's saying is, has God changed the rules? Does God care about me? Look what he's saying here. This word loving kindness in verse 8 is the special covenant love of God. It's the Hebrew word hesed. It means loving kindness, covenant loyalty. I think it's analogous to the Greek word agape, no strings attached sacrificial love. What he's saying is, God, I don't think I can trust you anymore. I think you broke your covenant. I think you're not keeping your promises. You're not doing to me what you promised to do. He is doubting God's covenant loyalty and God's promises. Now that is one serious flaw in this man. Notice what he's saying. Has his promise come to an end? Now haven't you asked these kinds of questions really in times of real distress? God, do you know what's happening? God, do you really care about me? God, are you here? All of us ask those questions. This man's just being perfectly honest. And I want to tell you the truth, and I mean this sincerely. I'd much rather be honest with God than I had just pray some sweet little prayer or act piously. There are days when I don't like God. There are days when I question Him. Do you ever do that? I think when I can be more honest in my prayer and say, God, I don't understand why you did that. I think it's unfair. I think that is a much more meaningful relationship and a sign of a real relationship than just this man's doubts tells me he really has a deep faith. Let me ask you a question. Do you holler at the people that you love the most or the people that you don't care about or just, peripheral friends? The only people I really get mad at is the people I love the most, my family. When this psalmist comes to question God, it's really a sign of the deep relationship and trust he has, that he feels open enough to say, God, what's the matter with you? Now, verse 10, I think, is the pivotal point of the whole psalm. In verse 10 it says, Then I said, It is my grief that the right hand of the Most High has changed. He's saying God hadn't changed. I've changed. It's my problem. The questions I'm asking, I've got the wrong perspective. It's my attitude. God hadn't changed. I've changed. I'm looking at this thing from the wrong end. I'm asking the wrong questions. I'm focusing on the wrong aspect. When he sees that, the rest of the psalm totally changes. And before I get to verse 11 and following, here's our announcer to offer you some opportunities for further Bible study. Phil?
Thank you for watching today. Bob will return in just a moment. We at the International Sunday School Lesson would like to take this opportunity to offer you a weekly exegetical outline of these Sunday School lessons free. This includes historical background, word and phrase study, and discussion questions. All we need is your address. Now, here is ours. International Sunday School Lesson Incorporated, Post Office Box 2711, Lubbock, Texas, 79408. Also, there is available free and postage paid the catalog of Bob's teachings on cassette tapes. This catalog includes over 900 subjects. We will be happy to send it to you this week so that you can order the tapes that interest you. Now, here's our address again. International Sunday School Lesson Incorporated, Post Office Box 2711, Lubbock, Texas 79408.
Thank you. What I think is happening here in verse 11 and following is that the author has switched from the narrow tunnel vision that all of us get on looking on my problems and my day and my family and my circumstances, and he's going to take the long look through history. Instead of focusing on what he feels like is unfair to him, he's going to look at God's acts in the past. Now that's really a very important aspect of who we are. Notice it says, I shall remember the deeds of the Lord, surely I will remember thy wonders of old. In the Old Testament, the words remembrance and forget are very important. Usually the metaphor of forgetting speaks of God's forgiveness of us, wiping our sin away. When God remembers, it means judgment. Now for us to remember is a different focus. If we remember or call to mind the graciousness of God, it gives us the big picture and the overarching balance of our life. Now, notice where it mentions here, I will meditate on all thy works and muse on thy deeds. Thy way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? And thou art the God who works wonders. You know, a book that I have in my library is called The God Who Acts. How different the God of the Bible is from the idols. God is really active in our life. We can see His footprints through history, and lo and behold, suddenly those same footprints appear in our lives. Sometimes it's so helpful to turn our perspective backwards where the footprints are more evident than they are in the existential present. You know, as I take the big look at my life, some of the things that I thought were so helpful and so great and so positive, I've realized I couldn't handle them and they became destructive. And some of the things that I thought were so hard and so hurtful and so inconsiderate and insensitive of God have been the greatest blessings of my life as I look back. Friends, the long look is the only way to really analyze who we are and who God is in our lives. He's taken the long look. Notice he says in verse 15, Thou hast by thy power redeemed thy people. The word redeemed is a Hebrew word that is goel. Now it's used in the book of Ruth for the Boaz and Ruth. Boaz was the nearest kin to Mary Ruth, the kinsman redeemer. In the Bible, there are several metaphors used for God. He's called a husband to Israel. He's called a parent. And here's the third. He's called our closest kin that redeems us back when we couldn't help ourselves. The word thy people, of course, is the covenant term. Now you probably have the word Selah in your Bible. We don't know what that means. We think it's some kind of musical term to mean a quiet interlude or a pause or a crescendo. We just don't know, but it's for the choir director. It means something to the musical arrangements. Now, notice where it talks in verse 16 through 18 about the waters saw thee, O God, the waters. This little passage is dealing with the Exodus. Now, the people in the Old Testament continue to go back to the Exodus to prove to their mind how much God loved them. New Testament Christians tend to go back to Calvary and the resurrection to show what God has done for them. What Calvary and the crucifixion and the resurrection and the empty tomb mean to Christians, the Exodus and the Promised Land mean to the Old Testament believers. And they're going back and thinking about how God redeemed them out of Egypt and delivered them and provided the Promised Land. Now, it wasn't always a downhill deal, as you know. It was uphill. There was a lot of problems in there. But as you take the long look, the love of God is clearly seen, even though existentially there were problems up and down. Now, verse 20 comes to the conclusion, Thou hast led thy people like a flock. Now, if you notice in the introduction of this psalm, it says a psalm of Asaph. One of the characteristics of the psalms of Asaph, and there are several, is this idea about shepherding and God as a shepherd or leading the flock. Let me give you a few. Psalm 74:1, Psalm 78:52, Psalms 78:52, Psalm 79:13, Psalm 80 verse 2. So here is a man who's been struggling with God in the sense of, are you in my life? Do you care about me? And then he takes the big look, and then he comes back to say, Lord, I think you are caring for me, I think you're acting like a shepherd. I think I'm your part of your people. And I want you to know it's all right. It's all right. I trust you. I do not think that doubts are a sin. This man's having great doubts. I believe that doubts are opportunities for God to show us how much He loves us. Some people never doubt, and that's good, but I don't know many of them. I think all of us at times say, God, do you really care about me? God, are you sure you know what you're doing? God, are you sure you're not late in this deal? Now that's the human part of us, and God often uses that to help us trust Him more. I want to mention again, since we're going to be in the Psalms for several weeks, I mentioned these books last week, and I want to give you the titles again in case you missed them. An Exposition of the Psalms by Loophole, Baker Publishing. Maybe in your church library. You ought to look for it. Alexander, the Psalms Translated and Explained, also by Baker. And find a little book by Tyndale, Tyndale Old Testament Series by InterVarsity Press on the Psalms. These three sources will really help you see some insight to the Psalms. We need to look at the Psalms on a critical level, an academic level, as well as an emotional level. It's important that we find out what the author was saying to his day and then apply that to our day. We can't just cut across the top because the cultures are too radically different. God spoke to those people in their culture. We must understand their culture before we apply the truths to our culture. Well, I've really enjoyed being with you, and I hope to see you again next week. Please send off for our free catalog. I think it'll help you, and as you follow with our outline. If you have friends who would like the outline, if you'll just send me their name and address, I'll be happy to mail it to them free. God bless you. I'll see you again, same time, same place, next week.